The heavy, $2,000 mahogany display stand rattled as Maya's shoulder slammed into it. She hit the polished marble floor of the Gangnam luxury mall hard, her shopping bag scattering, and a modest recovery gift for her daughter sliding across the floor. For a heartbeat, the air in the mall felt frozen. Maya looked up, clutching her defensive arm, to see the expensive Italian leather shoes of the man standing over her. Daniel Brooks, her ex-husband. The man who had walked out of a sterile hospital room 3 years ago, leaving her with a dying toddler and a mountain of debt. Still a pathetic, clumsy mess, I see, Daniel sneered, his voice loud enough to draw a crowd. He looked at her modest clothing with pure disgust. Did you sneak in here to beg, Maya? Because you certainly don't belong among people like us. Daniel had no idea. He had no idea that the woman who had once begged him for rent money while cradling a feverish baby was gone. He had no idea that the weak daughter he had discarded as a financial burden was currently recovering in a state-of-the-art medical suite paid for by the most powerful man in Seoul. He had no idea about the custom-made titanium security watch hidden beneath Maya's sleeve, or the title deed to the penthouse overlooking the Han River that now bore her name. And Daniel definitely had no idea about the man Maya had called husband for the last year, the man whose silent, dark-suited shadow was already falling over the mall's entrance. Park Seong-Hwan, the undisputed king of the underground. As Maya's fingers brushed the silent alarm on her wrist, and the mall's heavy glass doors began to lock with a mechanical thud, she saw the first flicker of confusion on Daniel's arrogant face. He had just shoved the wrong woman, and in exactly 5 minutes, when Seong-Hwan's motorcade screeched to a halt at the VIP entrance, Daniel Brooks was going to learn that some debts are paid in blood, not bills. He thought she was still nothing. He was about to find out she was everything to a man who never forgave an insult. Before we witness the total destruction of a man who abandoned his own blood, I want to wish you all a beautiful and empowered season. May you always find the strength to rise from the ashes of your past. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of this journey. Now, let's see what happens when the king finds out his queen has been touched. The crash of the glass display case was deafening, a sharp, crystalline explosion that silenced the ambient hum of the Gangnam luxury mall. Maya hit the polished marble floor hard, the impact jarring her teeth and sending a searing flash of pain through her shoulder. Her shopping bags, filled with a hand-knitted sweater and books for her daughter's recovery, spilled open, their modest contents looking painfully out of place against the backdrop of gold-leafed pillars and velvet ropes. Still a pathetic, clumsy mess, I see. Daniel's voice cut through the air, cold and dripping with the same arrogance that had once made Maya feel like she was breathing underwater. Maya looked up, her vision blurring for a second. There he was, Daniel Brooks, looking every bit the successful executive in a charcoal Italian suit. He stood over her with his chest puffed out, a smirk of pure contempt twisting his handsome features. It was the same look he'd given her 3 years ago in that sterile hospital hallway when he dropped the divorce papers on her lap, claiming he couldn't let her sickly daughter drag down his rising career. Did you sneak in here to beg, Maya? He sneered, stepping closer until his expensive leather shoe was inches from her defensive hand. Or are you just here to ruin the atmosphere for people who actually belong? You look like a stray cat that wandered into a palace. It's embarrassing. He gestured vaguely at her simple, worn cardigan, a piece she kept because the soft wool didn't irritate her daughter's sensitive skin. In Daniel's world, if it wasn't a brand name, it was trash. And because she wasn't wearing a brand, he assumed she was still the broken woman he'd left in the rain. He had no idea. Daniel had no idea that the woman he was mocking had spent the morning in a sun-drenched penthouse that cost more than his entire firm. He had no idea that the weak child he'd abandoned was currently the most protected little girl in South Korea, thriving under the care of world-renowned specialists. Most importantly, he had no idea that the woman on the floor was no longer a victim. She was the heartbeat of a man who ruled the city's shadows with an iron fist. I asked you a question, you worthless! Daniel started, reaching down to grab her arm to haul her up, his face reddening with a sudden, unprovoked fury. But his hand never reached her. Before he could make contact, the heavy glass doors of the boutique slid shut with a definitive, electronic click. A shadow, long and cold, stretched across the marble floor, swallowing Daniel's light. Maya felt the vibration of footsteps, heavy, rhythmic, and deadly. The morning sun flooded the Gangnam penthouse, turning the floor-to-ceiling windows into sheets of shimmering gold. From this height, the bustling streets of Seoul looked like tiny veins of light, miles away from the quiet sanctuary Maya Brooks now called home. She stood in the center of the vast living room, adjusting the lapel of her soft cardigan, a far cry from the hospital waiting rooms that had once been her only reality. "Remember, Maya Jr., if you finish your Korean history lesson before I'm back, there's a new set of paints waiting for you," Maya said, her voice warm and steady. The little girl looked up from her mahogany desk, her dark curls bouncing. 3 years ago, she had been a frail shadow in a clinical bed, her breath a jagged struggle. Now, thanks to the world's best specialists and a father figure who refused to let her fail, her cheeks were full and rosy. She gave her mother a bright, toothy grin that made Maya's heart swell with a fierce, protective ache. "I'll finish, Mama. I want to see the surprise." Standing near the girl was her private tutor, a woman handpicked by the most powerful man in the city, and just outside the door, 2 silent men in sharp suits stood watch. This was their fortress. It was a life built on a foundation of absolute security provided by Park Seong-Hwan, the man who had found Maya when she was a broken whisper and turned her into a queen. Maya picked up her purse, her fingers brushing the cold, heavy metal of the custom security watch on her wrist. Seong-Hwan had been overprotective lately, his dark eyes lingering on her with a silent intensity that spoke of the dangers his world commanded. He had insisted on a full security detail for her shopping trip to the luxury mall, but Maya had compromised, promising to stay within the mall's private VIP sectors. She wanted the stay to be simple. She wanted to pick out a recovery gift with her own hands, to walk among the beautiful things of the world not as a victim, but as a woman who had finally won her life back. "I won't be long, my brave girl," Maya whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. As she stepped into the private elevator that led directly to the underground garage, Maya felt a rare sense of peace. The debt was paid, the sickness was gone, and the man who had abandoned them was a fading ghost in a past she intended to leave behind forever. She was stepping out into a new horizon, unaware that the ghost was waiting in the very place she felt most secure. The transition from the armored silence of the penthouse to the vibrant chaos of the Gangnam luxury mall felt like entering another world. Maya stepped out of the sleek black sedan, her heels clicking softly against the pavement as she adjusted the strap of her bag. The mall was a cathedral of glass and steel, smelling of expensive perfume and the crisp, artificial chill of high-end air conditioning. Usually, the opulence felt like a shield, a reminder of the power Seong-Hwan had wrapped around her life. But today, the air felt strangely thin. She was passing a display of designer watches when she saw him, or rather, a silhouette that made her heart stop. A man was standing by a fountain, his back to her, his posture straight and steeped in a familiar, effortless arrogance. The set of his shoulders, the precise way his charcoal suit fit his frame, and the dismissive flick of his wrist as he checked his watch sent a jolt of ice through Maya's veins. Suddenly, the glittering mall vanished. The smell of expensive leather was replaced by the suffocating, metallic scent of a hospital wing. She was back in that dim, freezing room 3 years ago. She could feel the scratchy plastic of the chair beneath her and hear the rhythmic, desperate beeping of Maya Jr. as heart monitor. She remembered the door swinging open, but Daniel hadn't come in to comfort her. He hadn't even looked at the bed where their daughter lay fighting for her life. He had simply walked to the small bedside table, dropped a thick white envelope onto it, and adjusted his tie in the reflection of the window. "I can't do sickly, Maya," his voice echoed in her mind, cold and clinical. "It's bad for the brand. My lawyer will handle the rest. Don't call me." The memory hit her like a physical blow. Maya's lungs constricted, her breath coming in shallow, jagged gasps. Her world tilted, the marble floor beneath her feet suddenly feeling as unstable as the life she had once lost. She reached out, her trembling fingers catching the edge of a glass display to steady herself. Her pulse hammered against the security watch on her wrist, a frantic, rhythmic drumming that she knew was sending a silent alert back to the penthouse. "It's just a ghost," she told herself, squeezing her eyes shut as she fought to reclaim her senses. "He's a ghost. He can't hurt you here." But when she opened her eyes and the man turned around, The nightmare didn't dissolve. The face that had haunted her poverty-stricken nights was real, and those cold, predatory eyes were locking onto hers with a look of dawning, malicious recognition. The ghost had stepped out of the past, and he was walking straight toward her. The recognition in Daniel's eyes wasn't fueled by warmth or regret. It was a predatory gleam, the look of a man who had found a familiar kick toy he thought he'd lost. Maya tried to turn away, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but he moved with a deceptive speed, cutting off her exit and maneuvering her back into the corner of a high-end silk boutique. The scent of his expensive, woodsy cologne, the same one he had worn the day he drained their joint savings, clogged her throat. Maya stood surrounded by rolls of shimmering fabric that cost more than her old apartment, but under Daniel's gaze, she felt the phantom chill of a car she used to sleep in. "Maya!" "Well, I'll be damned," Daniel said, his voice carrying that familiar, polished lilt that hid a serrated edge. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her simple cardigan and the lack of visible designer logos. A mocking laugh escaped him. "I heard you were struggling, but I didn't think you'd sunk this low. What are you doing in a place like this? Did the cleaning crew lose a member? Or are you just here to admire the lifestyle you'll never have?" "Move out of my way, Daniel," Maya said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. She gripped the strap of her bag, her thumb hovering near the edge of her security watch. Daniel didn't budge. Instead, he leaned in closer, invading her personal space with an entitlement that made her skin crawl. "Don't take that tone with me. I'm doing you a favor by even acknowledging you. Look at you. Still wearing rags, still looking like the help. I bet you're here hoping for a handout, aren't you? Is that it? Is the little burden getting too expensive to keep?" The mention of their daughter, the child he had left to die because she was bad for the brand, sent a spark of protective fury through Maya's fear. "Don't you dare speak about her." "Oh, please," Daniel scoffed, waving a hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "We both know I made the right call. Look at me, Senior VP, a luxury condo in the hills, a life without anchors. And look at you. You're exactly where I left you, at the bottom, looking up at people who actually matter. You should be thanking me for showing you your place." He stepped even closer, his shadow looming over her, completely unaware that every word he spoke was being recorded, and that the man currently watching the live feed was not known for his mercy. Daniel thought he was cornering a victim. He had no idea he was stepping into a cage with a sleeping dragon. Daniel's face contorted with a sneer so sharp it felt like a physical blade. He leaned in until Maya could see the cold, hollow reflection of her own fear in his eyes. "You're still clinging to that kid, aren't you? The one who couldn't even manage to stay healthy for a week without draining a bank account." Maya's breath hitched, her fingers digging into the strap of her bag. "She is a fighter, Daniel. She is thriving. Something you'll never understand because you're too busy worshipping yourself." A harsh, bark-like laugh erupted from his throat. "Thriving? On what? Table scraps and government pity? Let's be honest, Maya. That girl was a genetic waste of money from the start. A defective product. I didn't leave you. I emancipated myself from a sinking ship. I saved my future from being buried in medical bills for a life that wasn't even worth the investment." The air in the boutique seemed to turn to ice. To hear the father of her child speak of their daughter's life as a failed transaction sparked a fire in Maya's chest that momentarily burned through her panic. "You are a monster," she whispered, her voice trembling with a newfound loathing. "She is worth more than every hollow success you've ever chased." Maya turned to walk away, her heels clicking rapidly against the marble as she moved toward the exit of the boutique. She didn't want to hear another word. She needed to get back to the fortress Seong-Hwan had built, back to the love that actually protected. "I'm not finished with you," Daniel barked. Before she could clear the threshold, he lunged forward. His hand caught her shoulder with a violent force, spinning her around and shoving her backward. Maya gasped as she lost her balance, her body colliding with a heavy glass display case. The sound of the impact was like a gunshot, followed by the terrifying, musical tinkle of expensive perfume bottles shattering against the floor. She fell to her knees, her modest dress tearing against a shard of glass, her shopping bag sliding into the fragrant, spreading mess. "Stay down!" Daniel yelled, looming over her, his face flushed with the adrenaline of his own cruelty. You don't walk away from me until I say you're dismissed. You're nothing, Maya. You were nothing when I met you, and you're even less than nothing now. He raised a hand as if to strike her again, completely oblivious to the fact that every mall security guard within a 3-block radius had just frozen in their tracks, their earpieces crackling with a command that would end his world. Daniel thought he was the master of this moment, but as the mall's heavy ventilation system seemed to hum with a new, dark energy, the shadows behind him began to move. The vibration on Maya's wrist was so subtle it was almost imperceptible over the roaring pulse in her ears. As she lay on the cold marble, surrounded by the scent of expensive, shattered glass, the custom-engineered watch, a marvel of obsidian and titanium, shuddered against her skin. It wasn't just a timepiece, it was a tether. The moment Daniel's hand had made contact with her shoulder, the internal sensors had registered the blunt force trauma and the subsequent, frantic spike in her heart rate. Miles away, in a glass-walled office that overlooked the heart of Seoul's financial district, the air suddenly turned lethal. Park Seong-Hwan sat behind a desk of reclaimed dark oak, his sharp eyes focused on a secure tablet. A crimson notification began to pulse on the screen, accompanied by a low, rhythmic chime that cut through the quiet of the room like a war drum. His hand, which had been reaching for a fountain pen, froze. He tapped the screen, and a biometric graph appeared. Maya's heart rate had surged to 140 beats per minute. A GPS tracker pinpointed her exact location, the boutique section of the Gangnam luxury mall. A second later, the watch's audio feed bypassed the mall's encryption, and Daniel's snarling voice filled the high-tech office. "Stay down. You're nothing, Maya." The pen in Seong-Hwan's hand snapped. The sound of breaking plastic was the only noise he made, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. His eyes, usually a calm, obsidian black, hardened into something predatory. He didn't scream. He didn't throw his chair. He simply stood up with a terrifying, deliberate grace that signaled a coming storm. He pressed a single button on his intercom. "The motorcade." "Now," he commanded, his voice a deadly, low-frequency hum. "And tell the mall director that if a single person enters or leaves that boutique before I arrive, his entire family will be looking for new careers by sunset." As he moved toward the private elevator, his elite security detail, men who moved like shadows, were already falling into formation behind him. They didn't need to ask what had happened. They saw the look on the king's face. Someone had touched his queen. Someone had dared to draw blood from the woman who had already bled enough for one lifetime. Seong-Hwan stepped into the elevator, his reflection in the mirrored doors showing a man who was no longer a businessman or a husband. He was the underground king, and he was descending to reclaim what was his. Daniel Brooks had spent years thinking he was untouchable, but he was about to learn that the most dangerous thing in the world is a man with everything to lose and the power to take it back. The streets of Seoul, usually a gridlock of midday traffic and impatient horns, seemed to bow in submission as the motorcade tore through the city. 6 obsidian black SUVs moved with the synchronized precision of a strike team, their sirens silent but their presence deafening. In the lead vehicle, Park Seong-Hwan sat in a vacuum of absolute stillness. His eyes were fixed on the digital map flickering on his console, tracking the steady, panicked beat of Maya's heart. Every second that passed without him at her side felt like a personal failure, a crack in the fortress he had promised to build around her. Inside the Gangnam luxury mall, the atmosphere shifted with the suddenness of a coming storm. The ambient music, which had been playing a soft, upbeat melody, abruptly cut to static and then silence. The shoppers near the boutique stopped in their tracks, sensing a change in the air that had nothing to do with the luxury surrounding them. Daniel was still looming over Maya, his mouth open to deliver another stinging insult, when the mall security team, men who usually blended into the background in their quiet blazers, suddenly snapped into a rigid, military line. Their faces, previously indifferent to the domestic dispute, turned into masks of stone. They didn't move toward Daniel to intervene. They moved to secure the perimeter, their earpieces crackling with a single, terrifying directive. The head of security, a man who had seen the rise and fall of many powerful figures, stepped forward, but he didn't look at Daniel. He looked toward the mall's main entrance, his posture one of deep, fearful respect. The screech of tires echoed from the parking garage, a sound so violent it vibrated through the marble floor beneath Maya's palms. Daniel blinked, finally sensing the shift. He looked around, confused by the sudden lockdown, his arrogance flickering for the first time. "What is this? Why are you all standing there?" he barked at the guards. "Get this woman out of here. She's trespassing." None of the guards moved. They didn't even acknowledge his existence. Their eyes were fixed on the heavy glass doors that were now being flanked by men in tactical gear. The doors didn't just open, they seemed to retreat. Seong-Hwan stepped into the mall, his long coat billowing behind him like a dark shroud. The power he radiated was so absolute that the crowd parted without a word, a sea of people retreating from a predator. He didn't look at the luxury displays or the gawking onlookers. His gaze was a laser, cutting through the space until it landed on the woman on the floor and the man standing over her. The king had arrived, and the record time he had made through the city was nothing compared to the speed with which Daniel's world was about to end. The atmosphere in the boutique didn't just change, it died. The air grew heavy and cold, thick with the scent of shattered perfume and the sudden, suffocating presence of absolute power. Park Seong-Hwan moved through the space with the predatory grace of a wolf entering a sheepfold, his dark eyes locked onto Maya's trembling form on the floor. Every step he took seemed to vibrate through the marble, a rhythmic countdown to Daniel's destruction. Daniel, blinded by his own inflated ego and the adrenaline of his cruelty, failed to register the terror paralyzing the mall guards. He saw only a man in a tailored coat interrupting his moment of dominance. Straightening his Italian silk tie, Daniel stepped forward, attempting to puff out his chest to match Seong-Hwan's height. "Look, pal, I don't know who you think you are, but this is a private matter," Daniel barked, his voice sounding thin and shrill against the silence. He gestured dismissively toward Maya, who was still clutching her bruised shoulder. "This woman is a trespasser and a nuisance. I'm just handling some old trash. So why don't you mind your own business and keep walking before I have security throw you out too?" Seong-Hwan didn't stop. He didn't even blink. He continued his steady march until he was inches from Daniel, his height and sheer physical mass casting a literal shadow over the smaller man. The elite guards behind Seong-Hwan fanned out, their hands resting on their holsters, their faces masks of lethal indifference. Daniel's bravado flickered, a hint of confusion finally touching his eyes. "Did you hear me? I said get lost. I've got connections in this city. I'm the senior VP of..." He never finished the sentence. Seong-Hwan reached out, his hand moving with a speed that defied his calm demeanor. He didn't strike Daniel. He simply placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, the same shoulder Daniel had used to shove Maya. The grip was slow, deliberate, and agonizing, the sound of Daniel's expensive suit jacket straining under the pressure. "You have connections?" Seong-Hwan's voice was a low, melodic hum that carried the weight of a death sentence. It was the first time he had spoken, and the sound made the onlookers draw back in fear. "That is fortunate. You will need them to find a place to sleep tonight." He looked past the whimpering Daniel, his gaze softening only when it landed on Maya. "Maya," he whispered, "the name a sacred vow. Did he touch you?" Daniel tried to pull away, his face turning a sickly shade of gray as he realized the men in tactical gear weren't there to help him. Who are you?" he stammered, his alpha facade crumbling into the dust. Seong-Hwan's grip tightened, his fingers finding the bone beneath the fabric. "I am the man who is going to show you exactly what happens when you treat a queen like trash." The pressure of Seong-Hwan's hand on Daniel's shoulder was not just physical, it was the weight of an entire empire pressing down on a single fragile bone. Daniel's knees buckled, his polished alpha facade dissolving into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked from the stone-faced security detail to the man whose eyes held the cold finality of a predator. "You asked who I am," Seong-Hwan said, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed louder than a scream in the silent boutique. He leaned in, his breath cold against Daniel's ear. "I am Park Seong-Hwan, and the woman you just shoved, the woman you called nothing, is my wife. She is the mother of my daughter. She is the dragon's heart." The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. The color didn't just fade from his face. It vanished, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. Everyone in South Korea knew the name Park Seong-Hwan. He was the man who owned the docks, the man who influenced the boardrooms, and the man who made people disappear without a trace. He was the Dragon of Seoul, a figure of urban legend and terrifying reality. Daniel's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The realization that he had just publicly assaulted the most protected woman in the country turned his blood to ice. He looked down at Maya, who was now being helped up by two of Seong-Hwan's men with a kind of reverence usually reserved for royalty. The beggar he had mocked was draped in the invisible silk of the city's most dangerous name. I didn't know, Daniel finally wheezed, his voice cracking. I had no idea I thought she was still. You thought she was defenseless, Seong-Hwan interrupted, his grip tightening until a sickening pop echoed from Daniel's shoulder. You thought you could discard a human life and never see the bill. You were wrong. Today, the debt is due, Daniel Brooks, and I am here to collect it with interest. Seong-Hwan let go so abruptly that Daniel tumbled toward the floor, landing in the very shards of glass he had forced Maya into moments before. The dragon didn't spare him another glance. He turned to Maya, his expression shifting from lethal fury to a tenderness so profound it silenced the room. He reached out, his gloved hand cupping her cheek, checking for every scratch Marcus had caused. In that moment, the entire mall understood. Daniel hadn't just made a mistake. He had signed his own death warrant. Maya stood tall, supported by the steady, warm hand of Seong-Hwan on her waist. The trembling that had racked her body moments ago had transformed into a cold, focused fire. She looked down at Daniel, who was shivering amidst the broken glass and spilled perfume, his expensive suit now stained and pathetic. The crowd of elite shoppers and store staff watched in a heavy, expectant silence, their initial shock turning into a morbid curiosity. You want to talk about being worthless, Daniel? Maya's voice rang out, clear and cutting, echoing off the high boutique ceilings. Then let's talk about the night you walked out of Seoul Children's Hospital. Let's talk about the ICU bill you left on the bedside table while our daughter was on a ventilator, fighting for every breath. Seong-Hwan's jaw tightened, his hand gripping Maya's hip a little firmer, his dark eyes fixed on Daniel like a death sentence. He didn't just leave, Maya continued, her gaze sweeping over the onlookers, exposing Daniel's polished lies to the light. He emptied our joint account. He took the money I had saved for her heart surgery and used it to book a first-class flight to the Maldives. He told me he needed a mental health break from the stress of having a sick child. While I was sleeping in a hospital chair and drinking tap water to stay full, he was posting photos of sunset cocktails. A collective gasp rippled through the boutique. The wealthy patrons, who moments ago had looked at Maya with disdain, now turned their glares toward Daniel. The shame he had tried to heap on Maya was now a suffocating weight on his own shoulders. You called her a genetic waste of money, Maya said, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt more powerful than a shout. You left a 2-year-old to die because she was an inconvenience to your brand. You aren't a senior VP, Daniel. You're a coward who runs when things get hard. And the only reason she's alive today is because a real man found us and did what you were too weak to do. Seong-Hwan looked down at Daniel, his expression one of absolute, chilling disgust. He didn't need to yell. The revelation of Daniel's character was its own kind of violence. A vacation? Seong-Hwan asked, the words sounding like ice cracking. You chose a beach over your daughter's life. Daniel tried to stammer an excuse, but the words died in his throat. He looked around at the circle of judgment, realizing that his social standing, the only thing he truly valued, was evaporating in real time. He had tried to humiliate a nobody, only to reveal to the King of Seoul that he was a monster. The debt wasn't just financial anymore. It was moral, and Seong-Hwan was ready to collect. Seong-Hwan didn't waste another second on words. To a man like Daniel, words were cheap. Only the loss of status and capital truly bled him. The dragon reached into the breast pocket of his charcoal overcoat and pulled out a sleek, obsidian smartphone. The crowd held its breath, the only sound the frantic, wet gasps of Daniel as he tried to scramble backward away from the shards of glass. Seong-Hwan made the first call. He didn't wait for a greeting. The CEO of Meridian Wealth. Tell him I am exercising the clause. I want Daniel Brooks removed from the payroll, his stock options nullified, and his professional reputation incinerated by the time I reach my car. Do it now. Daniel's eyes went wide. Meridian was his lifeblood, the pillar of his identity. He tried to speak, to beg, but the second call was already in motion. The director of the Financial Supervisory Service, Seong-Hwan commanded, his voice as cold as a winter night in the Han River. I have a file on a senior VP at Meridian. Fraud, embezzlement of joint marital assets, and tax evasion. Open a forensic audit on every account under his name. Effective immediately. Daniel's phone, lying on the floor near his feet, suddenly lit up with a frantic sequence of vibrations. A notification from his corporate email flashed on the lock screen. Urgent. Notice of immediate termination. The third call was the shortest and the most lethal. Seong-Hwan looked Daniel directly in the eye, a predator watching a dying animal. Freeze the Brooks accounts. All of them. Flag them for suspicion of money laundering. I want him unable to buy a bottle of water in this city. A sharp, digital chime echoed from Daniel's phone, the distinct sound of a banking app's critical alert. With trembling fingers, Daniel lunged for the device, his face going a ghostly, translucent white as he stared at the screen. Account status, frozen. Funds under investigation. Access denied. The $50,000 he had boasted about that morning, the luxury condo lease, the credit lines that fueled his alpha lifestyle, all of it vanished in the span of 90 seconds. He was standing in one of the most expensive boutiques in the world, surrounded by people who had once envied his success, and he was suddenly, utterly destitute. You called Maya nothing, Seong-Hwan said, stepping forward until the toe of his shoe touched Daniel's shaking hand. But nothing is what you see when you look at your balance now. You walked away from your daughter because she was expensive. Let's see how you enjoy being free when you have nothing left to spend. The digital alerts on Daniel's phone were merely the first tremors of a total collapse. He looked up from the screen, his breath coming in shallow, panicked hitches, searching for some spark of mercy in Seong-Hwan's obsidian eyes. He found only the cold, unyielding judgment of a man who had already decided the verdict. You think a frozen account is the end of it? Seong-Hwan asked, his voice a low, melodic vibration that seemed to rattle the very bones in Daniel's chest. He stepped over a pile of shattered glass, the crunch of the expensive crystal under his boot sounding like a final warning. You were so proud of your title at Meridian. You told Maya she didn't belong among people like you. You believed your position made you untouchable. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. I worked for years to get that VP chair. You can't just... I didn't just have you fired, Daniel. Seong-Hwan interrupted, his lips curling into a shadow of a smile that never reached his eyes. I found the acquisition of Meridian to be a necessary investment. The ink on the merger was barely dry an hour ago. I didn't buy the company for its assets or its portfolio. I bought it so that I could personally oversee the removal of its most significant liability. The air in the boutique grew even heavier. The onlookers watched, transfixed, as the reversal of power reached its zenith. The man who had entered the mall acting like a titan was now realizing he was merely an ant under the heel of a god. As the new majority shareholder, Seong-Hwan continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the store, I am here to inform you that your employment is terminated for cause. Not just for your professional fraud, but for the moral bankruptcy you displayed when you walked away from your own blood. You are barred from the premises of every building I own. And since I own this mall, the streets surrounding it, and the very ground you are shivering on, you are officially a trespasser. Seong-Hwan looked at the head of security, who was waiting in the wings. Escort this man out. Not through the VIP exit. Through the service tunnels. Let him walk back to the life he deserves, the one where he has nothing and no one. As the guards moved in to haul the broken, sobbing man to his feet, Seong-Hwan turned his back on him, dismissing him as if he were a ghost. He looked at Maya, his expression softening into a look of absolute devotion. Daniel had tried to hide his shame in high-rise offices and designer suits, but now there was nowhere left to hide. The king had wiped his name from the world, leaving him with nothing but the memory of the woman he had been too foolish to keep. The chaos of the removal, the sound of Daniel's frantic pleading and the heavy, rhythmic footsteps of the guards dragging him toward the service tunnels, faded into a dull hum as Seong-Hwan turned his full attention back to Maya. The lethal, predatory edge that had defined him moments ago vanished, replaced by a devotion so intense it seemed to draw all the light in the boutique toward them. In front of the remaining shoppers, the elite staff, and the cameras recording every second of this historical reversal, the most feared man in Seoul did something that silenced the room more effectively than any threat. He knelt. With a slow, deliberate grace, Seong-Hwan lowered himself onto the marble floor, settling his knee right beside the glittering shards of glass where Maya had been forced down just minutes before. He didn't care about the dust or the spilled perfume staining his bespoke trousers. His only focus was Maya. He reached out, his large, steady hands gently taking her foot. Her heel had been knocked loose during the struggle, the strap dangling uselessly. With the focus of a man performing a sacred rite, he slid the shoe back into place, his fingers lingering for a second against her skin to ensure she wasn't injured. He buckled the strap with a click that sounded like a seal of protection. "I promised you that the world would never hurt you again," he whispered, his voice a low, private rumble that only she was meant to hear. "And I failed you for 8 minutes. That will never happen again, Maya. Never." He stood up but remained close, his hands moving to her shoulders. He began to brush the white dust of a shattered display from her coat, his movements rhythmic and soothing. He straightened her collar, his thumbs grazing her jawline, forcing her to look up and see the absolute sincerity in his obsidian eyes. Daniel, catching one last glimpse over his shoulder before the guards shoved him through the heavy metal doors of the service exit, looked paralyzed. He saw the man who had just destroyed his life treating the woman he called trash like a fragile, priceless treasure. The sight was a final, crushing blow to his ego. He hadn't just lost his money and his job. He was witnessing a level of love and loyalty he was incapable of ever understanding. Seong-Hwan finished cleaning her coat and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. He didn't just see a survivor, he saw his queen. By kneeling in the middle of a public mall, he had sent a message louder than any headline. Maya Brooks was under the protection of the dragon, and the price for touching her was everything. "Let's go home," he said, his hands sliding into hers, their fingers interlocking perfectly. "Our daughter is waiting for her surprise." One of the most expensive boutiques in the world, surrounded by people who had once envied his success, and he was suddenly, utterly destitute. "You called Maya nothing," Seong-Hwan said, stepping forward until the toe of his shoe touched Daniel's shaking hand. "But nothing is what you see when you look at your balance now. You walked away from your daughter because she was expensive. Let's see how you enjoy being free when you have nothing left to spend." The digital alerts on Daniel's phone were merely the first tremors of a total collapse. He looked up from the screen, his breath coming in shallow, panicked hitches, searching for some spark of mercy in Seong-Hwan's obsidian eyes. He found only the cold, unyielding judgment of a man who had already decided the verdict. "You think a frozen account is the end of it?" Seong-Hwan asked, his voice a low, melodic vibration that seemed to rattle the very bones in Daniel's chest. He stepped over a pile of shattered glass, the crunch of the expensive crystal under his boot sounding like a final warning. "You were so proud of your title at Meridian. You told Maya she didn't belong among people like you. You believed your position made you untouchable." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. I worked for years to get that VP chair. You can't just... I didn't just have you fired, Daniel. Seong-Hwan interrupted, his lips curling into a shadow of a smile that never reached his eyes. I found the acquisition of Meridian to be a necessary investment. The ink on the merger was barely dry an hour ago. I didn't buy the company for its assets or its portfolio. I bought it so that I could personally oversee the removal of its most significant liability. The air in the boutique grew even heavier. The onlookers watched, transfixed, as the reversal of power reached its zenith. The man who had entered the mall acting like a titan was now realizing he was merely an ant under the heel of a god. As the new majority shareholder, Seong-Hwan continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the store, I am here to inform you that your employment is terminated for cause. Not just for your professional fraud, but for the moral bankruptcy you displayed when you walked away from your own blood. You are barred from the premises of every building I own. And since I own this mall, the streets surrounding it, and the very ground you are shivering on, you are officially a trespasser. Seong-Hwan looked at the head of security, who was waiting in the wings. Escort this man out. Not through the VIP exit. Through the service tunnels. Let him walk back to the life he deserves, the one where he has nothing and no one. As the guards moved in to haul the broken, sobbing man to his feet, Seong-Hwan turned his back on him, dismissing him as if he were a ghost. He looked at Maya, his expression softening into a look of absolute devotion. Daniel had tried to hide his shame in high-rise offices and designer suits, but now there was nowhere left to hide. The king had wiped his name from the world, leaving him with nothing but the memory of the woman he had been too foolish to keep. The chaos of the removal, the sound of Daniel's frantic pleading and the heavy, rhythmic footsteps of the guards dragging him toward the service tunnels, faded into a dull hum as Seong-Hwan turned his full attention back to Maya. The lethal, predatory edge that had defined him moments ago vanished, replaced by a devotion so intense it seemed to draw all the light in the boutique toward them. In front of the remaining shoppers, the elite staff, and the cameras recording every second of this historical reversal, the most feared man in Seoul did something that silenced the room more effectively than any threat. He knelt. With a slow, deliberate grace, Seong-Hwan lowered himself onto the marble floor, settling his knee right beside the glittering shards of glass where Maya had been forced down just minutes before. He didn't care about the dust or the spilled perfume staining his bespoke trousers. His only focus was Maya. He reached out, his large, steady hands gently taking her foot. Her heel had been knocked loose during the struggle, the strap dangling uselessly. With the focus of a man performing a sacred rite, he slid the shoe back into place, his fingers lingering for a second against her skin to ensure she wasn't injured. He buckled the strap with a click that sounded like a seal of protection. "I promised you that the world would never hurt you again," he whispered, his voice a low, private rumble that only she was meant to hear. "And I failed you for 8 minutes. That will never happen again, Maya. Never." He stood up but remained close, his hands moving to her shoulders. He began to brush the white dust of a shattered display from her coat, his movements rhythmic and soothing. He straightened her collar, his thumbs grazing her jawline, forcing her to look up and see the absolute sincerity in his obsidian eyes. Daniel, catching one last glimpse over his shoulder before the guards shoved him through the heavy metal doors of the service exit, looked paralyzed. He saw the man who had just destroyed his life treating the woman he called trash like a fragile, priceless treasure. The sight was a final, crushing blow to his ego. He hadn't just lost his money and his job. He was witnessing a level of love and loyalty he was incapable of ever understanding. Seong-Hwan finished cleaning her coat and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. He didn't just see a survivor, he saw his queen. By kneeling in the middle of a public mall, he had sent a message louder than any headline. Maya Brooks was under the protection of the dragon, and the price for touching her was everything. "Let's go home," he said, his hands sliding into hers, their fingers interlocking perfectly. "Our daughter is waiting for her surprise."